Unfortunately, I don't have a wife, so I don't have any letters to quote from her, although one of the reasons they came to Budapest was perhaps to find one, so I'm open to suggestions. Why are you applauding? I'm serious. So I'm amazed. I've come from Silicon Valley, which, as you know, is very flat. Or some of you may know, you haven't been there. It's very flat and very dull. And I'm amazed with this theater. It's just, I mean, if I could turn that light out, I could perhaps see it. But it's, in a little bit of research I did on Wikipedia before my talk, apparently this is Venetian Gothic, whatever that means. And I was redone in, I think, 2002. It's about 115, 120 years old. And of course, for an American like myself, it's amazing. It's particularly amazing as a movie theater. It's a place, of course, of dreams, a place of selling things, a place of exciting people, but also of scaring them. It's called, of course, the Urania Theater. The word urania originally in Greek meant heaven and came to be the muse of astronomy in the Greek. So it's all about the future. Heaven, though, of course, is very closely related with another H word, hell. There is no heaven without hell. And when we think about the future, we often think about heaven. Christian and Marxist theories, of course, are very dependent on notions of heaven. You guys know more about the Marxist experience and perhaps the Christian experience than I do. I've been in a marriage, though, so I understand some elements of hell. So we've talked a lot about the future. Some people, there was a guy this morning, I think Jeff, who talked about imagining or predicting or capturing the future. But I'm here not to celebrate the future, but to warn you about it. I'm here to tell you about hell. I'm here to warn you about a future that we're falling into, consciously perhaps or unconsciously, that is extremely troubling and scary. I'm here to talk about the fate of individual liberty in the networked age. I'm an internet expert, an internet writer, coming out with a book next year called Digital Vertigo, which fears for the impact of individual liberty on all of us in the networked world, in what Silicon Valley is now calling the social world. Does anyone know that image? Vertigo, the great San Francisco movie, in my view, the greatest movie ever made, of course, made by Hitchcock, an expert, perhaps, in Venetian Gothic. I'm guessing, I'm hoping, I'm 99.9% sure that Hitchcock's masterpiece, Vertigo, a movie about falling in love with something that didn't really exist, a blonde who turned out to be brunette. I'm sure that that movie, 1956 masterpiece, his greatest film, starring Jimmy Stewart, was shown in this movie theater. And of course, it's appropriate because we know that this Venetian Gothic might seem to be heaven, but it's also, in a sense, hell. Now, we're in Central Europe, so I can be Hegelian for a moment. And I can quote a fellow Hegelian from a movie called The Social Network, an actor called Justin Timberlake who was representing a fellow called Sean Parker, one of the most influential entrepreneurs and technologists in Silicon Valley. He founded Napster, and he was the original president of Facebook. This is a statement from The Social Network, perhaps the most famous statement in the movie. He was snorting cocaine from a girl's chest, and he said, in terms of believing in the future, he said, first we lived on farms, that's what Marx, of course, called agricultural society. Then we lived in cities. Marx called that the bourgeoisie or the Industrial Revolution. And now we're going to live on the internet. Marx missed that bit, of course, because he died 150 years ago, although in a sense he predicted the internet. He imagined a world where we would all be free in the morning to do whatever we liked, steal content from the internet, and make our dates on the internet. So in a sense, I think Marx would be very comfortable. But in all seriousness, I'm here to talk about that trinity, this vision of first living on the countryside, then in the cities, then on the internet. Because we're at that moment. We are experiencing a profound shift. Marx was, of course, the great analyst of the shift from the agricultural to the industrial. We're experiencing a similar, what Marx would call grand historical shift. From the industrial, from the analog, to the internet, to the digital. So we're on the verge of a new world, a place where literally we're living online, a place where the digital is becoming real. Back in about 2003 or 4, there was a website called Second Life, in which we were supposed to go on the internet and create avatars and replicate ourselves. Second Life now is archaic. There is no Second Life on the internet. The internet is first life. Now, we've been through a dramatic network revolution before in the industrial age. Again, I don't need to tell you about the surveillance world that we created from the middle of the 19th century. Jeremy Bentham imagined an industrial world. He called it a panopticon, or an inspection house, where we were observed all the time. Bentham turned himself into a guinea pig for the Panopticon. When he died, he left his body to University College, and when you go there, you look at his corpse. So Bentham is there all the time. He's what I might call hyper-visible, and hyper-visibility is the new reality in the digital world. Cultural critics like Baudrillard and Eco talk about hyper-reality, but the reality of the early 21st century is hyper-visibility. Now, not everyone agreed with Bentham in the industrial age. Not everyone agreed that we should be observed all the time. Many people rejected his notion. The most articulate critic of Bentham was his former pupil and disciple, John Stuart Mill, who wrote a book in 1856 called On Liberty, which is the critical defense of individual liberty in the analog networked age. Mill understood that this world, this agricultural world, had been swept aside by urban society, this world of mass media, of mass communication, of mass transportation. Mill understood that this was a world in which the individual liberty would need to be protected. He understood that conformity, observation, surveillance were all deeply dangerous. And of course, you in Central Europe, more than us in the United States or Western Europe, understand the repercussions on individual liberty of the Industrial Revolution. For 20 or 30 years, you lived under an industrial surveillance society. Many millions of other people in the industrial world did so too. So, coming back to heaven and hell, Bentham imagined the heaven of the Panopticon or the inspection house, but of course it turned into the hell of communism and Nazism, and in many respects other elements of surveillance society in the industrial world. So now we're entering the new world, the data world. A lot of people say at the World Bank, data is the new oil. In the analog industrial age revolution, creativity was driven by oil, by things we dug out of the ground. This new world is driven by data. The new rich in this world are those who own data. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, 26-year-old dropout of Harvard University, is worth, I think, between $10 and $12 billion. In the latest Forbes list that came out a few days ago, I think he's in the top 10 wealthiest men in the world. What does Zuckerberg control? He owns data. He owns all of us data. How many of you are on Facebook? How many of you are on Twitter? How many of you are on LinkedIn? How many of you are on no social network? Self-evident. And this is Hungary, right? That was a joke. I'm not going to get my wife now, right? Got to be careful here. I won't make any Romanian jokes, by the way. So anyway, data is the new oil. The data barons from Zuckerberg at Facebook, Reid Hoffman at LinkedIn, Biz Stone at Twitter, and all the other billionaire young data men of Silicon Valley, these are the people who are controlling our new world. So what is going on? This new digital world is one in which we are choosing to reveal ourselves. The old industrial world was one I call the age of the great exhibition. But today, we are living in the age of great exhibitionism. I took this photo of this woman. I shouldn't probably have done it. I was in Athens last weekend on top of the Parthenon, and everybody was photographing everybody else. So, of course, I was photographing the photographers. That's the most fun you can have now on top of the Parthenon. You're all on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, because you want to show yourself off to the world. Hitchcock, of course, would have fetishized this. Hitchcock, with his obsession with voyeurism, both in literal terms, given some of the stories about him, and also in his films. Vertigo, of course, and also Rear Window, classics of industrial voyeurism. So we are all going onto this network to promote ourselves, to build our identities. It's not just narcissism. We're going onto it because the industrial age is dissolving. We are working for ourselves. We are promoting ourselves. So this platform, this place, this digital world that we're living in is the place where literally we're having to promote ourselves. We are, to quote James Gleick, who's just written a wonderful book on information, we are all becoming information. I was in Athens, as I said, a couple of weeks ago, and I was sitting down with a very well-known, I won't mention her name, a woman who is one of the pioneers of the internet, a good friend of mine, and at one point, we hadn't been drinking, and we weren't talking about marriage, she opened her computer and showed me her DNA printout. She showed me what diseases she was susceptible to. There were some weird ones like dodgy arm syndrome or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was a weird one. We are literally becoming information. James Gleick, for example, talks about this DNA in an almost Hegelian way. The whole history of human beings has been a narrative of coming to this moment where we literally become information. Hegel talked about the grand realization. All you need to do now is go on the internet and get your DNA and you know who you are. We are living in an age of what I call the cult of the social. You all know this young man, this multi-billionaire, Zuckerberg. He is the tip of the iceberg, although he's a pretty rich tip. Everyone is idealizing the social. Every few minutes in Silicon Valley, and there are some Silicon Valley guys here, someone is founding a new social network, a new social group, social education, social commerce, social gaming, social this, social that, social reading, social TV, social medicine, social education. Everything, and I use this word carefully in Middle Europe, is becoming socialized. Think about it. Everything. The world in which we're living, this network now is a place where we're expected to reveal ourselves. People in Silicon Valley are excited by new startups, social TV, for example, in which our network will know exactly what we're watching. Our network will know where we're bicycling, where we're driving. Location services like Foursquare reveal to the world exactly where we are. And we're walking into it. Heaven, hell. We're walking into it. Just as in Hitchcock's Vertigo, Jimmy Stewart walked into the blonde, fell in love with her, and then realized that she was a brunette and had a nervous breakdown. We're walking into it with our eyes open, this new socialized world. Here's the real Sean Parker. I took this photo in Paris a few weeks ago at the EG8. He's just founded a company called Airtime. It's going to be a big company. And he just gave a quote to Forbes magazine earlier this month. He said, "My pitch is to eliminate loneliness." Now, of course, in a sense, I guess I pitched publicly my attempt to eliminate loneliness to this crowd. But in all seriousness, do we want to eliminate loneliness? Loneliness is essential to the human condition. It's the loneliness that Bentham wanted to eliminate in the middle of the 19th century. It's the loneliness that Hitler and Stalin tried to eliminate. You guys know, again, this story, this narrative, this nightmare, this story of hell better than I do. Now, what's his name? Sean Parker is not Rakoshi. He's not Stalin. He's not Molotov. He's not that smart. But we are walking into the same nightmare. We are falling into the same trap of idealizing the social. Here she is, Kim Novak, the blonde. Hands up, who wouldn't fall in love with her? She's remarkable. And of course, Kim Novak's performance in Vertigo was her greatest performance. That was the woman that Jimmy Stewart fell in love with. I don't usually quote French people because I'm not keen on them, but I do have to quote this one. Foucault, visibility is a trap. And in all seriousness, Foucault is a master theorist. Foucault understood this better than anyone. Foucault is the 20th century's greatest critic of Bentham, and his argument that visibility is a trap is one that should be taped to the foreheads and to the arms and abdomens of every young person on the internet. Visibility is a trap. It's a personal trap. It's an intellectual trap. It's a political trap. We need, in this new digital world, to learn how to retire. We need to understand that loneliness is not a bad thing. It's essentially human. And that the more we reveal ourselves, the more we put ourselves on the network, the more we lose ourselves, the more it becomes a nightmare in the human condition. We've been through one of those, or two of those, in the 19th and 20th century. We don't want the 21st century to become another socialized nightmare. Finally, I'll leave you with an image. Vermeer's Lady in Blue. As I said, I've just written a book on digital vertigo, and I end the book with me looking at Vermeer's Lady in Blue. An exercise in loneliness, in solitariness. And that's what we need to look at and look to in the digital social world. We need to remind ourselves that solitariness is essential to the human condition. And that whilst I'm not necessarily against all kinds of social activity, the social is a cult which needs to be controlled if we're to build a coherent and civil digital world in the 21st century. Thank you.